Hello, DCA students. From time to time in Dr. Litton's class, when I offer a lecture that has a lot of information in it, I like to post a video like this one on my YouTube channel that recaps or summarizes what I went over, just in case you want to go over it again. And you've got your notes, that's great, but you want to hear it from me one more time, especially if it deals with some important ideas or terms or concepts and whatnot. So I'm going to give you just a little recap of that part one lecture that I did on Puritanism, the origins of Puritanism. So to recap very briefly, we talked a little bit about myths and misconceptions about Puritans. See the little pilgrim guy down there in that goofy little outfit? And we talked about the fact that we got that all wrong, right? That's not the way they dressed. They didn't have those kinds of guns. And a lot of the things that we assumed about the Puritans back in the day really aren't accurate. They didn't dress that way. They didn't act that way. They didn't talk that way a lot. We get that from the Victorians. Later on, we're going to talk about why that happened. But for the most part, the Victorians are why they wear those stupid buckles on them, right? They didn't wear buckles like that. Buckles didn't come around for another 100 years or so. But myths and misconceptions about Puritans that we kind of inherited from the Victorians. They reinvented the Puritans and they got it really, really wrong. So we have to kind of dispel those. Everything about, family, marriage, sexuality, that kind of stuff, alcohol, tobacco, those kinds of things. The Victorians kind of painted an inaccurate picture of them. So we're trying to get to see what the real Puritans were like. Well, to do that, we have to go back in time and talk about where did Puritanism come from. And so we talked about the fact that in the Western world, for several centuries after Christ, there was just one church, and that's the Catholic Church. But in the 1500s, Martin Luther comes along, and Martin Luther starts objecting to some of the practices and some of the structure and some of the things that the Catholic Church in Rome was doing. And he eventually sort of broke away and formed a movement called Lutheranism. That inspired people in England. Some of them got the ear of King Henry VIII, who wasn't really happy with his marriage and wanted to get a divorce, but because England was a Catholic country, to get a divorce he needed approval from the Pope, and the Pope was not going to budge on it. So Henry got the bright idea of saying, well, what if we just break away from the Catholic Church, form our own Church of England, C of E, called Anglicanism, and we'll pretty much keep it the same in a lot of different ways. We won't make a lot of changes to the rituals and traditions. We won't change the church as much. We'll let priests get married, and there'll be some other minor changes. But for like your hymns are a little bit more nationalistic. But for the most part, you walk into an Anglican church in the year 1550, and you really won't be able to tell much difference from that church and a Catholic church, for example, other than maybe a few of the songs that they sing in the worship service. So Henry didn't want to change a lot of things, but he wanted to make sure that he had that. Now, he did it because he wanted a divorce, but he also did it because he wanted all that land and property that was owned by the Catholic Church in England. So don't keep your eye off of that. That was a big motivation too. Now, there were some people, though, that said to Henry VIII, well, we want to go further than this. Let's don't just break away in name only. Let's cleanse the church of all these things that we don't like about it, right? This is our opportunity, if we're going to break from Rome, to reinvent Christianity and get it back to its original origins, its original practices. They wanted to purify Christianity from its, what in their view, the corruptions of Catholicism. Now, you may be Catholic, you may be Protestant, let's don't argue about it. This is just history. I'm just telling you how people in England at the time who were advocating for Protestantism and breaking away from the Catholic Church felt. This is their view, not necessarily mine or yours. So they wanted to, in their view, purify the Church of England. Now that they had set up a Church of England, let's go farther than just breaking away. Let's purify it. They wanted to purify the structure of the church, otherwise known as the polity, right? The polity is how a thing is governed. Think politics, if you want to. How it's governed, how it's structured. And in Catholicism, you have a very hierarchical top-down system of church governance. You've got the Pope at the top, and you've got cardinals, and under that are bishops, and under that are priests and whatnot. And who your priest is in your local parish church, is determined not by the congregation, but by the bishop or whomever whomever, right? So you're sent a priest. You don't get to pick that person. They wanted to purify this and say, no, the early church had it right. Over the centuries, we've gotten this wrong. We need to return the power to the local congregation. Deacons and elders should hire their own minister. All those decisions should be made on the local level. Well, you can imagine Henry VIII didn't like that too much because, again, Henry VIII saw himself as a kind of a political pope of the Church of England. Wait a minute. I don't like the idea of giving these individual churches all this power. I wanted the power because I wanted the property. You can see the problem. The second thing they wanted to purify were the practices. They said, it's fine letting priests marry, that's okay, but we also want to get away from certain practices that the Catholic Church allowed, which would be things like statues of saints and pictures and stained glass and crucifixes and incense and these kinds. They wanted to just make very, very simple worship services. They thought all that was idolatry. They didn't like all of that. They wanted you not to go to confession or anything like that. They wanted you to be able to just confess your sins straight to Jesus. He was our intercessor, and so they didn't like some of the practices that they perceived that the Catholic Church had that they objected to. Okay, and then the third thing that they wanted to purify was the membership, so that when Henry VIII set up the Church of England and broke away from Catholicism, people said, well, how do you become a member of this church? And Henry says, just be born or live in England, and you're automatically a member. Well, people who took their faith seriously said, wait a minute, that's no good. I don't like that. You should have to do something. You should have a statement of faith. The congregation should vote you in. You should live an upright life, something. So they wanted to purify the membership. So you get all this. They're trying to purify the polity. They're trying to purify the practices. They're trying to purify the membership. If you want, you can say polity, practices, and people. That's what they wanted to purify. So hence Puritanism. Then the next thing we talked about is, after saying, well, we've got the Puritans wrong, and this is how historically they came about, and this is why they call them Puritans and what they wanted to purify, then we started in on what were some of their beliefs. Now, we covered 3 beliefs in class. One was the idea of original sin. Most people who are Orthodox Christians understand that Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, and we have inherited that sin nature from them. So everyone is in need of salvation. That's not terribly controversial. Pretty much every Orthodox Christian believes that, right? But the Puritans really emphasized it a lot, okay? The second thing they believed in was the doctrine of election. And you'll remember that we're not talking about like elections, like political elections. We're like who's of the elect, meaning who's going to heaven. And we talked about the fact that Puritans spent their lives not knowing or not having certainty of their salvation. Now, many of us today are part of a whatever congregation or tradition or faith tradition you're part of, believing that there is assurance of salvation. Okay, I, for one, for example, believe that. But the Puritans didn't. They thought, no, it's largely a guessing game all the way up to the end. You never know who God has already preordained to go to heaven and preordained to go to hell. But you can sort of, kind of, all your life get hints and clues. Remember my example of an envelope with your letter grade in it? You can't open the envelope till the class is over, but the letter grade is what you got. And somehow the teacher sort of had superpowers of psychic ability to know what you would do. Now, you still made all the choices, according to Puritanism. So you had free will. It's just that God knew what choices you would make, and he already knows whether you're of the elect or of the damned, as they would say. So this doctrine of election, they get it from a guy named John Calvin for the most part, but we don't have to go into that. But that's a very important belief that they had. And then the third belief is a very, very strict, very, very literal, very, very detailed view of providence. We all believe that God directs our lives, that God directly intervenes in human affairs. We believe that he heals people, that he is involved in human affairs, everything from business to politics to history, everything, right? But the Puritans would believe that every single thing that happens in your life, God was behind it, right? Everything that you do had some sort of meaning from God, and that they spent their lives trying to figure out, why did this happen? Why didn't this happen? What does it reveal? What does it tell me about my possible salvation? So they were really, really concerned with this. So they took providence. I mean, they believed that everything happens for a reason. You know, if you spill your coffee in the morning, it happened for a reason. They were quite literal and quite extensive in that belief. So those were the 3 beliefs we left off with. When we come back on Monday, all right, we're going to pick up some more beliefs, and we're going to start with William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. If you want to view this video a couple of times, that's great. I like to keep it to 10 minutes, so that's that. Thank you.